Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Decoding the Unknown. As always, is my jumper green? This is completely irrelevant, and I'm sure all of you watching as a podcast, listening as a podcast, what are you going on about? I'm wearing a grey jumper, but I'm looking at my little monitor that shows me myself to make sure everything's lined up nicely, and you can see all the shit all over my desk. This is grey. I don't know why it looks green. What's going on? It doesn't normally look green. Is it green? Anyway, we're talking about A Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald today. It's written by Dave. Thank you so much, Dave. If you're new here, the format of the show is I've never read this before. We're going to read it. It looks so green.
It's not easy being green.
I'm sorry, no one's here for this. I'll decode the mystery of my jumper looking green. We'll have some sort of blue or white dress situation going on. Anyway, the format of the show, I've never read it before. Let's read it together, dear audience. If you're still here. I mean, it wasn't exactly the most compelling introduction to a YouTube video ever, was it? I personally owe The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald a great deal. I don't know what the Edmund Fitzgerald is. I feel like I've heard of it, but I can't remember anything else about it. After all, if it were not for this ship sinking on the Great Lakes, it's highly unlikely that I would ever have come to work for Simon. Okay, I don't know if he remembers. I do not. But we began chatting after I uploaded my first video to my own YouTube channel. Being a complete novice when it came to these things, I sent emails to all my favorite YouTubers asking them if they could possibly take the time out of their schedule to watch my video and offer constructive criticism. The only person who bothered to do so with Sai, what can I say? What can I say? I definitely don't pay Dave, so he doesn't have, so he's got no reason to say nice things about me. Did I really do that? That's so nice of me. It really feels like something I wouldn't do. Oh, God. Okay. Even with his incredibly useful expert advice, I was unable to forge a career as a YouTube superstar. However, we vaguely stayed in touch, throwing emails back and forth about once a month. One afternoon, I sat unemployed in my lounge when my 3-year-old child somehow managed to make our Amazon Alexa play the Gordon Lightfoot classic, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. As I listened to the song, a song I'd heard on countless occasions, I thought, this is the sort of thing Simon would cover. And grabbing my phone, I sent him an email asking why he had not done so already, along with the suggestion that if he was interested, I'd probably have a crack at writing the script. The rest, as they say, is history. I got my phone right here. I want to look up my first interaction. Oh, it's going to be so far back in my inbox. Dave and I email a lot. Page. Dave Page. Almost read out his email address there. Sort by. Can I sort by old? Date. Custom range. Oh, God. This is not going to work. This is not going to work. Oh, good Lord. Oh, dear me. Oh, dear me. Oh, dear me. No, I'm sorry, Dave. We send too many emails to each other.
How rude.
Along with the suggestion that if he was interested, I could have a crack at writing the script, and the rest, they say, is history. Simon accepted the script, and I was transformed from an unemployed person to a published writer within a matter of weeks, and absolutely nothing at all went wrong with my original first draft. I'm not going to tell the story for you, Dave. It's fine. We had a little issue. Sadly, although I'd look back at the script with some fondness, it is utterly terrible. I can only assume that Simon saw in it some untapped potential, because I certainly would not have employed me on the strength of its content alone. Now, some 3 years later, I'm excited to revisit the wreck, retell the story in a hopefully much more professional manner, as well as to delve into some of the conspiracy theories that surround the sinking. Conspiracy theories which, I must be honest, I had no idea existed until fairly recently. So put on your life jackets along with your tinfoil hats and join me as we take another look at the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. The ship. Ordered in 1959 by Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company of Milwaukee, who had decided that investing in the iron and minerals industry had the potential to be exceptionally profitable, the Edmund Fitzgerald was a beast of a ship. In fact, had it been a few centimeters wider, it would not have been allowed to pass through the St. Lawrence Seaway, a system of locks and waterways which allow passage from Port Colborne, Ontario and Montreal and provide access to ports in all 5 of the Great Lakes. Well, I imagine, Dave, that the reason it was a little bit smaller is so it could fit. It's like, isn't Panamax a size of ship, which means it is basically as big as you could get for it to squeeze through the Panama Canal? And then there's post-Panamax, which is ships that are just bigger than the Panama Canal because they realize, if we make them bigger and send them round, bigger ships are just more efficient. Even being built to these ever so slightly limiting specifications, there we go, the Edmund Fitzgerald was, and would continue to be for several years, the largest vessel to ever carry cargo on the Great Lakes. Although very definitely designed as a cargo vessel, the Edmund Fitzgerald was actually a pretty nice place to be. According to a video on YouTube titled Maritime Horrors, whose channel owner was not only happy for me to quote his work, but provided me with contact information for perhaps the single greatest expert on Great Lakes shipping, Legend, which shout out Maritime Horrors, which contained a huge amount of information that I had not previously known about the Fitzgerald. Quoting, "The interior could honestly be described as lavish. The vessel included 2 guest staterooms and a lounge, a laundry room, a recreational deck, oversized crew cabins outfitted with luxury carpets, bathrooms, and private showers, along with air conditioning. Even the crew lounges, usually rough and ready places on other ships, contained luxury leather sofas and recliners and had been designed with a stunning panoramic window. Who designed this ship? That's so nice!" In addition to these creature comforts, the owners had spared no expense when it came to technology. The massive engines made it one of the fastest boats on the lake, and the wheelhouse was equipped with the very latest in navigational and communications equipment. Finally, instead of the usual single mess hall that you might find on similar ships, the Fitzgerald had 2 separate dining rooms, both of which were serviced by an almost restaurant-quality kitchen. Was this just a ship for, sending shipping around? In my mind, even today, it's you see those big ships out on the ocean. I imagine, aren't they run by 20 people or something insane? So there's this massive ship. I imagine there's just 20 dudes on there who are kind of haven't washed their clothes in a while. Because they're fuck it, who cares? We're all just smelly sailors on a ship. Who's going to complain? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're all living it up. As someone who just recently returned from what was allegedly a luxury cruise with gastrointestinal issues that caused germaphobe Simon to have a bit of a meltdown when I told him about it over WhatsApp, it really does sound rather awesome. The second captain sounded like a bit of a legend as well. Peter Pulser, for that was his name, took over command from Captain Bert Lampert, a man about whom I was able to find very little information, and earned the Fitzgerald the nickname of the Singing Ship, due to his propensity to play music over the ship's loudspeaker, and whenever they were passing close by to the shore, he would come out on deck with a megaphone and shout at anybody who might be watching them pass. This legend. Ahoy there!
Ahoy!
Although he was invariably referred to by those who sailed under him as an easygoing, affable captain, he still ran an exceptionally tight ship. That's the sort of boss you want. That's the sort of boss I aspire to be. Someone who's he's a good dude, he's affable, people like him, but it's also gotta run a tight ship, otherwise we're not gonna have jobs, are we? I like that. During his time as captain, he set a single hauling record of over 30,000 tons on 4 separate occasions. Not only that, in 1969, under his command, the Fitzgerald transported a total of 1.3 million tons of taconite, smashing the Great Lakes record. Okay, it was 1.35, but I didn't want to read out the full number here because it's really long, and now I've spent even longer talking about not reading out the large number. God damn it!
Professionalism.
It wasn't just the captain who was a consummate professional. Fully aware that the ship was a Great Lakes icon, as well as a record-setting behemoth, its operators sought out and employed the most talented and experienced sailors that the shipping industry had to offer. Okay, well, that's why they made it really nice. Because it's like the Google thing, right? In my mind, it's the Google thing. I don't know what it's actually called. But where it's you just put in a way of attracting talent is money. You can pay people lots and lots of money. But also, if you make the workplace kind of fun and give people some free food and shit, and maybe a football table in the lobby, they're ooh, that's nice. Because before I was working in the Dunder Mifflin office, and now there's a slide in the break room. Now, it might appear that I'm unnecessarily blowing sunshine up the arses of everybody who worked on the ship, but there's a point to this, and it will be apparent later on. For now, however, let's move on to the next important player in the story. Captain Ernest M. Msorley. If you search Google for Captain Msorley, then there really isn't a great deal of information to be had. However, I was fortunate enough to come across a YouTube video made by a man who, shall we say, had somewhat of an obsession with the Edmund Fitzgerald's final captain. So here's a little bit of background information. It's an interesting person to have an obsession with. Born in Canada during 1912, incidentally the same year that the Titanic sank, Msorley had a pretty rough early life. After losing his mother at the age of 5, he was moved to Ogdensburg in the state of New York, just off the St. Lawrence Seaway, and it was here that his fascination with shipping began. Initially, he started his career on seagoing vessels at the age of 18 before quickly moving into Great Lakes freight shipping. I'm really dumb. For some reason, I'm like, why has he moved to New York? Isn't he Canadian? And I'm like, oh no, the Great Lakes are between Canada and America, right? I don't know why I was thinking they were Canadian. Initially, he started his career on seagoing vessels at the age of 18 before quickly moving to Great Lakes freight shipping, signing on as a humble wheelsman. It would not be long before he progressed to third, second, and first mate. Msorley wasn't prepared to spend the rest of his career second in command, however, and very quickly obtained his master's license, which allowed him to assume the role of captain. In fact, so ambitious was Msorley that he appears to have been the youngest captain ever on any ship that travelled the Great Lakes. By the time he took over from Peter Pulser at the start of the 1972 season, he had over 40 years of experience and had already been the captain of 9 other vessels. Holy shit, that's a good career. Although described as slightly less personable and withdrawn than his predecessor, Msorley was still well respected among the crew, and given his previous service record, was certainly in keeping with the habit of only employing the very best. To those proponents of the conspiracy theories we'll get into later, it is exactly this level of crew experience and professionalism that leads them to doubt what has become the official version of events.
Dun, dun, dun.
The official version of events. Had my original script been any good, I could simply sit back, relax, and copy and paste a huge chunk of it here. Sadly, it wasn't, so I had to rewrite it. Here we go. On November the 9th, 1975, 2 ships, the Edmund Fitzgerald and the Arthur Anderson. Wait, as in like Enron? Arthur Anderson was the accounting company that collapsed because it was it allegedly helping to cook Enron's books, or did they just get kind of screwed when Enron went down? Didn't they become Accenture? I once had an interview at Accenture. It was my first ever job interview at like a proper company. I didn't do very well. I didn't realize that job interviews were for big companies were complicated. They asked you questions like, tell me about a time you've worked on a team and things didn't quite work out as you expected them to, but you still managed to pull through and led to a successful result and your role in that team. And I'm like, I don't know, boss. Shit.
And now back to your regularly scheduled program.
The Fitzgerald from Burlington Northern Railroad Dock, Superior, Wisconsin, and the Anderson from Two Harbors, Minnesota. The Fitzgerald, as verified by the shipping records, the news, and later the Gordon Lightfoot song written about the voyage, was loaded with 26,116 tons of tiny taconite pellets, basically pre-processed iron ore to be used for whatever it is they use iron ore for. I imagine turning into iron and making shit. Maybe they make steel from iron, right? Just quickly before we move on, I may have misled you a little bit. Whilst the song I mentioned stays remarkably accurate to the story, it actually lists the weight as only 26,000 tons, presumably because the line, with a load of iron ore 26,116 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty, just has not got that roll-off-the-tongue feel that lyricists crave. Anyway, moving on. What's this song? I don't know this song, but it seems very specific anyway. Being the faster ship, the Fitzgerald took the lead, with the Anderson following behind at a range of between 10 and 15 miles. According to people who knew about these things, November is notorious for horrendous storms on Lake Superior, and this day was slated to be no exception. In fact, there were already reports of quite the hoolie, a term I first heard from sailors down at Portsmouth docks, so I assume it is a proper technical term. Dave, what's your experience hanging out at Portsmouth docks with sailors? I don't think I've ever... That's not true, I've met many sailors. But, like, not in this context of, like, sailors on commercial vessels and stuff. I've only met, like, Navy sailors.
Hello, sailor.
On its way from the Great Plains, so both captains had agreed to take the longer northern route because it would offer them quite a bit of protection from the highlands on the Canadian shore. From around 2:30 p.m. until 4 p.m, everything seemed to be going fine. It was windy, but certainly nothing that would have even troubled an inexperienced captain, and, as we have already established, Msorley was the best of the best, and Captain Bernie Cooper of the Anderson was no slouch either. As far as we know, neither of them were at all bothered when at around 7 p.m, gale warnings were issued. Quote, sustained winds of 39 to 50 miles per hour. And still, they elected to continue when the gale force winds became storm force winds, which is, quote, upwards of 64 miles an hour. Given that these were accompanied by 16 to 20-foot waves, god damn, conditions on board can't have been particularly pleasant. I, like Dave, recently went on a cruise for the first time. Never been on a cruise before in my life. Was something I was kind of like iffy about because, one, I was either gonna like it or I was really not gonna like it. And 2, cruise ships are fucking horrible for the environment. So I was a little bit conflicted, but I've got 2 young kids, and I also heard they're pretty amazing if you've got young kids. Turns out they are fucking amazing if you've got young kids. And we were on this cruise just like in the Mediterranean, and it was completely calm. But I was fascinated by, what if there's a big ass storm? And I was watching these videos on YouTube of like people filming inside cruise ships on storms with like all the shit like flying around the place. And I'm like, I don't want that to happen, but I also do. Like, I'd like to see what that's like. Like, you're just in the bar, it's like, tables falling over and people's drinks all over the floor. Both captains had survived worse, and turning back wasn't really an option either. It was not until around 2 p.m. the next day, the 10th of November, that things showed any sign of going wrong. Captain Cooper would later report that he saw the Fitzgerald passing too close to 6 Fathom Shoal, a notoriously dangerous area of shallow water to the north of Caribou Island, and it is this uncharacteristic moment of carelessness that people not determined to believe that the ship was attacked by the Kraken or the crew was abducted by aliens think that things started to go wrong. The thing is, when the Fitzgerald first launched, it was allowed to carry quite a lot less than it was on this trip. Although I could not find an actual deadweight capacity at the time of manufacture, and believe me, I did try, we can attempt to work it out with some crude mathematics. Well, I say we, but I actually got a proper nerd to do the math for me. We know that between the time of launch and the time the ship sank, the Coast Guard increased the high water line 3 times. By the time the final increase was authorized, the ship would sit around 3.5 feet lower in the water than when it was new. I've been reliably informed that if you take all necessary numbers into account, this means that she was carrying around 4,000 extra tons. Holy shit. Somewhere between a fifth and a sixth more than what she should have been. I mean, what she should have been is, she should have been for this. I mean, they authorized this. It wasn't like just randomly loading it up higher. I'm sure there was, engineering involved. Sciencey stuff. Whether or not this was the cause of the problem, we do know that not long after, at around 3:30 p.m, Msorley radioed Cooper to tell him that things were not going very well. The following is a transcript of their radio conversations, presumably copied from Cooper's logbook originally, but in this case, lifted directly from my previous script. Good. The last time Simon read this, he got whomever edited it to put some kind of radio effect over the voice, just to try and make the script a little bit interesting. Well, that sounds fun. Why don't we try and do that, dear editor?
If I must, I must.
Anderson, this is Fitzgerald. I have a fence rail down. 2 vents lost or damaged. And a list. I'm checking down. Will you stay by me till I get to Whitefish?
Now, for those of you who are not up on your boat lingo, checking down means slowing down. The first time I read that, I was convinced it meant putting everything away so it did not get washed overboard. Next, Captain Cooper asked Msorley if he had his pumps going, and Msorley said,
Yes, both of them.
Throughout the afternoon, the 2 ships exchanged several more radio messages, but it appears that they were only going to discuss navigational data. There are no further reports of trouble until about 6:55 p.m, when Captain Cooper reports that the Anderson was hit by a wave large enough to drive the stern of the boat underwater. Whoa. This was followed by another wave of similar size. As to whether or not this would have happened if the ship was 4,000 tons lighter, nobody seems to be able to tell me. Probably because they can't be sure. In my not an expert on boats opinion, though, probably not. Captain Cooper reports that he watched those 2 waves head down the lakes towards the Fitzgerald, later reporting that he believes that they were the 2 that caused the ship to go under. At this point, the Fitzgerald was already in a bad way. They'd lost both radar arrays, one of the pumps was broken, and they were listing heavily to one side, so it's quite likely that Cooper was correct. At about 7:10, Morgan Clark, the first mate aboard the Anderson, spoke to the Fitzgerald via radio one last time.
Fitzgerald, this is the Anderson. Have you checked down? Yes, we have. Fitzgerald, we're about 10 miles behind you and gaining about 1.5 miles per hour. Fitzgerald, there is a target 19 miles ahead of us, so the target would be 9 miles on ahead of you. Well,
Answered Captain Msorley.
Am I going to clear? Yes, he is going to pass to the west of you. Well, fine. By the way, Fitzgerald, how are you making out with your problems?
Asked Clark.
We are holding our own. Okay, fine. I'll be talking to you later.
Clark signed off, and as far as I can tell, nobody would hear from them ever again. There are records of the Fitzgerald communicating with other boats in the area, but that was all much earlier in the day. Well, that was when the Kraken got them, right? Cooper said that they could see the Fitzgerald on radar for a short while afterwards, and then a giant Kraken. Not really. But only intermittently because of the choppy conditions. At 7:15 p.m, they disappeared for the final time. Several members of the Anderson's crew attempted to contact them via radio, but were unable to do so. After subsequently reaching out to the other ships in the area to see if they'd received any communication and not getting a positive response, Cooper immediately contacted the Coast Guard to let them know what he believed to have happened, and the official search for survivors began at 8 p.m. Shortly after that, after battling through some of the worst weather they'd ever experienced, the crew of the Anderson arrived safely in Whitefish Bay and were presumably looking forward to spending some time on ground that wasn't trying to pitch them into the water. Given that the conditions were only worsening, you can probably imagine how welcome the Coast Guard's next radio message to Cooper was. The only ship that stood a chance of finding any survivors under those conditions was the Anderson, so he wanted him to leave the safety of Whitefish Bay and do what they could. All credit to Cooper and his crew because they did just that. Yeah, I mean, you got to though, right? It's like the law of the sea or whatever. You got to rescue those other... Is that what the law of the sea is? There's that thing about, like, if a boat's drowning, even if it's your enemies or whatever, you've got to go pick them up because... Come on now. After making their way back to the place that Cooper was fairly sure the Fitzgerald had gone down, they would eventually find a couple of lifeboats, an oil slick and some debris. Sadly, the lifeboats were empty, and further search of the area would turn up no survivors. So the Anderson crew made their way back to the safety of Whitefish Bay. Around 4 days later, according to an article from the National Weather Service, quote, on November the 14th, 1975, a US Navy plane with a special magnetic anomaly detector located a strong contact about 17 miles northwest of Whitefish Point. During the next 3 days, the Coast Guard cutter Woodrush located 2 large pieces of wreckage in the same area under about 535 feet of water. A Navy underwater recovery vehicle photographed the wreckage on May the 20th, 1976. The pictures clearly showed the words Edmund Fitzgerald on the stern of piece of the sunken ship. So, well, there we have it. All the things that we know to be true. Although it seems to be a fairly complete story, there's still quite a lot of debate over why the Fitzgerald sank. Look, I know there's quite a bit of this script left, and I know we're going to get into some pretty wild conspiracy theories, I'm sure, but it does seem like, well, the boat was really heavy. It had been increasing its load capacity over time, so all the time it gets lower into the water. Then there was a really big storm, described as the worst weather that they'd ever seen, and it fucking sank, didn't it? Why do we need something more than this? It might have even hit that, like, shallow area, because they were a little bit off course, because the weather was probably horrible, and they're all distracted and stuff. They're enjoying their, like, leather sofas. That's a joke. I think they're probably extremely competent, and were just in a horrible situation. On paper, she should have been capable of handling those conditions, and the theory that she sustained damage to the north of Caribou Island is just that, a theory. After all, if the captain knew that he had sustained damage at that point, and there is no way he could not have known, if the expert that I was lucky enough to speak with can be trusted, then why would he not have told Captain Cooper just how serious the issue was? Could it simply be a matter of pride? Did he, the seasoned, well-respected captain, not want to admit that he messed up? Or was there something else going on? No, I don't think it got damaged by this. I think it's just like, what was the thing there? On paper, she should have been capable of handling those conditions. Sure. And on paper, that you can have lots of things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to be true. There are exceptions. On paper, the Titanic was unsinkable. Guess what? It fucking sank, didn't it? Everything I read about Msorley, and I've been working on this on and off for about a year now, leads me to believe that he was not the kind of man who would risk his entire crew just to save face. No, I don't think so. I think if you've risen to the rank of captain and you're commanding a ship, you've got there because you're not the sort of guy who's like, better cover up my problems. At least for the majority of ship captains. So if I'm right, then whatever happened must have happened so fast that the crew did not have an opportunity to put out a mayday call. Let us now take a look at what the Coast Guard suggested in their official report, shall we? Just to clarify, we will not be looking at the entire report, as it comes in at just slightly over 120 pages. What we have here is a summary. After 3 years of investigations, it was concluded that these were the main factors leading to the sinking. Number 1, the Fitzgerald sat very low in the water, increasing the frequency and quantity of water that could flood the deck. 2, the loose hatch covers allowed water spilling on board to enter the cargo area, causing the ship to sink even lower and take on more water. 3, more water could have entered through damage in the hull caused by the possible grounding near Caribou Islands. Although there is speculation that the Fitzgerald broke in half on the surface as the bow and stern rode the crest of the 2 large waves that struck the Anderson earlier, the Coast Guard's final report suggests the Fitzgerald instead nosedived into a large wave, was unable to recover because it lost so much buoyancy, and plunged to the bottom of Lake Superior in seconds. As the heavy cargo shifted forward quickly whilst the Fitzgerald was going down, the bow of the ship hit the bottom with such force that the vessel snapped in two. All of this seems extremely open and shut to me. The findings go on to heavily imply that negligence was afoot. The hold of the Fitzgerald had 21 hatches, each of which were held in place with a steel cover equipped with 68 clamps. Presumably, it was the job of the crew to check these clamps regularly to ensure that they were functioning optimally. Again, though, and I know that I keep coming back to this, but I found only good things about the work of the crew prior to their signing up with the Fitzgerald, so I'm inclined to believe the Lake Carriers Association when they claimed they did not believe the crew to be at fault. Yes, however, you can be fantastic at your job. Like, you can be really good at it. But sometimes you'll make a mistake. It just happens. People are not perfect. They make mistakes. Like, I'm sure, like, some surgeon or whatever, he's, like, removed, like, 1,000 kidneys, and he's, like, the best kidney remover ever, and sometimes he'll be like, fuck! Didn't mean to cut that! In a letter sent to the National Transportation Safety Board in September 1977, they said that they were inclined to accept the Fitzgerald passed over 6 Fathom Shoal area as reported by Captain Cooper, and that extensive damage to the front of the superstructure lent greater credence to this theory, and that is how she sustained the damage which ultimately caused her to sink. Still, these were different times. Back then, it was still considered rude to speak ill of the dead. I think it still is considered rude to speak ill of the dead, but I mean, look, if you're analysing a plane crash and the captain made a mistake, you're like, yo, the captain screwed up and everyone died. You're not speaking ill of the dead. It's just a fact. If you were like, and he was a dickhead, then you'd be like, well, did you really have to include the dickhead thing? So it's possible there was some damage control going on. Perhaps it's better to blame a single captain than laying the blame on the entire crew. Captain Cooper certainly seemed to think so. In a recorded interview with the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society, he maintained that he believed Captain Msorley was immediately aware that the ship had sustained irrevocable damage when she passed through 6 Fathom Shoal, and from that point on, he knew they were sinking. This theory, but then why wouldn't he put out a mayday call? I don't believe that he wouldn't. It's like, oh, I screwed up. You would still put out a mayday call. It's just not worth your life and the life of your crew because you screwed up. It's just not worth it. No one, you'd have to be a complete psycho to be like, no, I can't do that. I got to save face and die. And even if you're a psycho, you're still self-preservation focused. Like, come on. The theory was further backed up when the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society carried out 3 further investigatory missions to the wreck, and the damage certainly appears to be indicative of having been sustained earlier on in the voyage. Okay, that's interesting. Defenders of Msorley argue that even if he did know what had happened, there was very little he could do. Turning back wasn't an option, as they were more than halfway to Whitefish Bay, and it is certainly believable that a confident captain could overestimate his abilities and convince himself that they could make it without tragedy. Okay, that's fine. But then it's like, the way people were saying it before is like, oh, he knew it was sinking. He knew, and he did nothing about it. No. Maybe he just didn't realize it was as bad as it was. He didn't think it was necessary to put out a mayday. Those who lay the blame squarely at his feet, however, ask why he would not call for help as soon as he knew about the damage and not place his crew in unnecessary danger. And that, ladies and gentlemen, Simon, leads us smoothly into the first conspiracy theory surrounding this incident. Now, if you poke the Reddit swamp just a little, it won't be long before this little gem floats to the surface. The idea focuses on the fact that Msorley did not ask for more help and questions just exactly why this might be. It also could be a matter of, well, they're in a major storm. They can't send help. Like, they're not going to send out a rescue boat because you'd just be sending good men after living men after dead. Like, they wouldn't risk the lives. Because they'd just be like, well, it's a huge storm. I mean, it was suicide. What if, people ask, the reason he did not ask to be rescued was that the Fitzgerald was carrying something other than pre-processed iron ore? Okay. If you try not to think about it too hard, this could make a little bit of sense. After all, 1975 was right in the middle of the Cold War. All kinds of top-secret things were undoubtedly going on on a cargo ship on the Great Lakes. Look, do I deny there's all sorts of top-secret shit during the Cold War? Of course not. Lots of that stuff is not top secret anymore, and it was crazy. But this, bit much for me. There are all sorts of suggestions as to what might have really been on board, but I think this one is my favourite. Imagine, if you will, the following scenario. Msorley's story is largely the same. He works his way up the chain of command and becomes a captain, proving his abilities, resourcefulness, and trustworthiness. Then, because the United States government needs to move some top-secret stuff from Canada to the US, they infiltrate a suitably boring company who just happen to own their own freighter hauler. Like, I don't know, Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company of Milwaukee. And depending on the size of the aforementioned secret cargo, nobody is going to know anything about it. Even if the cargo was massive and required the majority of the ship's capacity, who is going to notice the Fitzgerald making a few extra trips every year? As long as they fling a couple of thousands of tons of iron ore as well, it's the perfect camouflage, right? I mean, this isn't necessary. They'd just be like, yeah, no, we're using this boat for some top secret shit. What top secret shit? It's top secret, dude. You can't know about it. I'd be like, okay, sure. Obviously, there will always be one weak link in this plan. Whether or not he knew everything that was going on, Msorley would have had to know some of it, especially if, and I swear to you that this is a genuine conspiracy theory with far more than a handful of supporters that you would hope, the things that the Edmund Fitzgerald were carrying were nuclear warhead-equipped missiles. I don't think that's how the US military moves around its nuclear missiles. That's right, there are genuinely at least a few people out there who think that the US government, in order that they might keep under wraps the true amount of nuclear weapons they were packing, were having them manufactured in Canada and then shipped in. Well, in ships like the Edmund Fitzgerald over the Great Lakes, some of the most turbulent waterways in the world, to the good old United States of America.
Ladies and gentlemen of this supposed jury, it does not make sense.
You know what also exists? A fucking land border. Right? There's a lands border. Just put them on a big old truck. Don't need to send them across the choppy waves. Although Dave has framed this as the most outlandish conspiracy theory that he's ever heard. It's like, Dave, mate, you got to watch more Decoding the Unknown. There's some truly crazy shit out there. Do I believe this? No, not for a second. Now, I love a good conspiracy theory as much as the next person who refuses to go outside and touch grass. But let's take a look at this and see if there's any little problem threads that we might be able to pull on. As it transpires, and I highly doubt that anybody out there will be surprised to hear this, there are indeed some threads to pull on. So let's start with the actual logistics of this idea. Can I also just point out that the US was very open. They were like, oh no, we got thousands of nuclear warheads. And the Soviet Union, we got thousands more. And the US is like, not as many as us. They were boasting. It was open knowledge. By 1975, the United States already had not only a sizable stockpile of warheads, but also plenty of places to make their own. Oak Ridge, Los Alamos, Hanford, Rocky Flats. The list goes on and on. Actually, I have no idea whether or not it does. That list came directly from a Google search, and the page suggested there were more, but I thought it was probably enough to be getting on with.
That's just lazy writing.
Still, even if this is the entire list of facilities, it rather proves that they didn't need to be made anywhere else, doesn't it? Even if they only had one place to make them, and took absolutely ages, the idea that they could be made faster, cheaper, and better in Canada is kind of just ridiculous. Why would they outsource something that they wanted to keep entirely secret? Even the United States government of today wouldn't be that stupid, probably, and they were a lot better at keeping secrets back then. As far as you know, Dave. Next, let's take a look at the Edmund Fitzgerald itself. Although for a Great Lakes ore carrier at least, it was positively decadent when it came to fittings, fixtures, and overall comfort, it was still, in the end, a great big barrel designed for transporting crap that really couldn't be broken beyond use. The very idea that it might transport nuclear warheads, fairly delicate pieces of equipment that can theoretically go off if mishandled, is right up there with the hollow earth theory, Microsoft coming up with an idea that they didn't steal from someone else, allegedly, and the concept of TV personalities being elected to high office. Wait, maybe not that last one. That keeps happening. Why is that? Maybe it's an idea for an episode. Who else is... What other TV person... There is another TV personality. There's another world leader who was a TV star. Obviously, Trump's the main one. But there was another one, right? Who the hell was that? Who the hell is that? Just in case there are any of you out there who are still prepared to give this idea the time of day, let's keep going. One of the only even slightly cogent, perhaps even the only slightly cogent arguments to support this theory is that it may explain why Msorley was so reluctant to call in the ordinary Coast Guard for a rescue and risk abandoning the cargo. Obviously, such reckless behavior could result in the whole plan being discovered. As I said, only slightly cogent, because if there was even the slightest chance that such a cargo on a ship was at all in danger, it would be swarmed on all sides by any number of military vehicles. Furthermore, if it actually had gone down with anything like that on board, it's fairly unlikely that it would have been reported on the news, and there would have been a much better cover-up. Maybe. I do disagree with Dave that it would necessarily be escorted by loads of ships. Didn't they... Wasn't that... The big diamond, was it the Hope Diamond that was like mined in South Africa or whatever, and they wanted to get it back to London? So they set up this really elaborate convoy with like an armoured train and all of this stuff and sent it all the way up through Africa and back to London. And the Hope Diamond wasn't even on board. They just put it in a box and mailed it. The whole thing was just a diversion. Sometimes it's better just to be like, there's nothing on there, so why would we protect it? Nothing there, move along, nothing to see. Don't make it a target, you know? So I think, we can put this one to bed. Lay it to rest on the seabed, if you will. All right, Dave. There is absolutely no chance that any of this is true, and anyone who thinks it should immediately apply for a job on the History Channel. Damn! So, what else do we have? Well, this next theory is what I like to call the Captain Ernest M. Msorley was actually a massive bell end theory. So, do you remember way back when I said that I could find nothing to indicate that Msorley was anything other than a consummate professional legend? Well, I lied. Actually, I didn't directly lie. I just had not found out about this at that point and chose to leave it in so I could crowbar in this little reveal. According to a video from the From Waterline Stories YouTube channel, Msorley may not have been the fantastic guy that everybody made him out to be. Furthermore, he may have been given advanced warning that there were problems with the ship's hull, and rather than attempting to do anything about it, simply hoped that it would last until the end of the season when he was retiring. Prior to the 1975 season, the Edmund Fitzgerald was taken out of the water so that routine maintenance and cleaning could be performed. During that time, George Bergner, a cook on board the Fitzgerald, who would miss the final voyage due to problems with his feet, claimed to have witnessed some rather suspicious behavior. According to an article I obtained, in full at great expense from the archives of the Minneapolis Star. Why is it so? Wait, did I get... I remember... God, it's because we did this so long ago, Dave. I have vague recollections of talking about this with you. Whether I'd pay for that. I was like, did I pay for that? I hope I paid for that. If not, just add it to my bill, Dave. Quoting, well, how much was it, Dave? What is an extraordinary sum? Great expense, even. Dave, if you paid over £100 for this, mate, I'm not giving you the money. Sorry. Prevailing wisdom is that the Fitz was sturdy and well-maintained, and that Msorley was an excellent captain. Government investigators theorize that the ship sank from taking on water through hatch covers that may have not been properly clamped. But most sailors and ship owners believe that, hampered by broken radar and inaccurate lake charts, the Fitz was punctured by Caribou Shoal, slowly foundering and eventually went under. Bergner's story supported a third theory. Weakened metal and or unrepaired cracks and damage caused the Fitz to tear open or even break in half, just like the Carl D. Bradley on Lake Michigan in 1959 and the Daniel J. Morrill on Lake Huron in 1966. He even offered proof that Msorley and Oglebay Norton, the company currently leasing the Fitzgerald, knew about the damage. He testified that he witnessed a company official being told about the loose keel, and he relayed part of a conversation he said he overheard between Msorley and crew members who had been digging mud out of the ship's bottom and reported that the keel was loose again. Bergner testified that the captain said, "All this son of a bitch has to do is stay together one more year. After that, I don't care what happens to it." Uh-oh, that's not looking great. The article goes on to say, quoting again, "During winter, Bergner cared for the Fitzgerald at Fraser Shipyards in Superior. He said he was there in winter of 1973 to 1974 when a government inspection showed that the keel, a steel backbone running from stem to stern, had broken loose in several places. Coast Guard reports confirm that new breaks or repaired cracks were found in that area but required only simple rewelding." Bergner also testified that by the summer of 1975, Msorley, a year from retirement, was preoccupied with his wife's failing health, rarely anchored for bad weather, and sometimes sailed with most hatch clamps off until the next work shift to avoid paying overtime to deckhands. This is looking much worse for you, Msorley. Another later published article from the same paper says, quoting again, former Fitzgerald cook George Bergner recently called the wife of one of the victims of the tragedy and told her that he gave the information in deposition 20 years ago, but the information was suppressed and he was told to move to Texas. He says the ship's owner, Oglebay Norton Co. of Cleveland, told him, if nobody brings your name up, we're not going to mention it either. Maritime law requires proof of negligence before your ship owners are required to pay damages. Without Bergner's statement, the sinking appeared accidental. Bergner said that he made his information public because the widow of Alan Cowman told him that she had not yet received any compensation from the company. Attorney who represented several of the victims' families said settlements range from $100,000 to $500,000. He said the company paid more than would have been required had a court found the vessel seaworthy. End quote. So, as you can see, far from being a clear creation of crazy tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy mongers, this one may have some truth to it. Yeah, this doesn't seem like a conspiracy theory. This just sounds like, well, someone had a different story about the dude, and maybe he wasn't the awesome legend that people seemed to think he was initially. Or Dave did, and I did because Dave told me so. Granted, it seems to rely largely on the testimony of one person, but it does seem to be backed up by the payout discrepancies. Whether or not I should continue to refer to it as the Captain Ernest M. Msorley was actually a massive bellend theory is perhaps up for debate, though. If everything we have learned is actually true, he is perhaps more guilty of becoming tired and disillusioned than of outright willful negligence. It would appear that the majority of scorn would be heaped upon the company leasing the Fitzgerald for not maintaining the ship properly and concealing information about this failure. So before we round things up for the day, let's take a look at one more, shall we say, slightly outlandish possibility. I actually came across this whilst researching for a script about the dark web. Okay, it's quite a leap, for reasons that temporarily escape me, but it never actually came to fruition. The thing about what the media refers to as the dark web is that it is not actually as evil as some of you may have been led to believe. Yes, there are undoubtedly sites on there that, should you have the misfortune of visiting them by accident, will make you want to not only erase your hard drive, but burn all of your computer hardware just in case. But there is also a bunch of really cool and interesting stuff available if you know where to look. I love the dark web. It's one of my favorite ways of wasting time between 3 and 5 a.m. when I invariably wake up and can't get back to sleep. I've been on the dark web, but I went on, this was back in the day, it was like when Silk Road was around, and I was like, oh shit, you can really buy like heroin on the internet. And fortunately I didn't see anything horrible, but I of course imagine it exists. I mean horrible, I think, look, this happened so long ago that I'm probably conflating it. I'm not sure if there were people offering to do like assassinations and like proper crimes on the dark web, on the Silk Road when I went on it. But I know there was like that sort of thing on there at some point, was there? Maybe? I don't know. The best part is that everyone, or almost everyone, who reads any of what is on there is half asleep, and a sleep-deprived brain can take the mildly weird and turn it into something which, if you're not careful, you could accidentally believe. If you think that conspiracy theories are Reddit are wild, then just think what somebody who's prepared to put a lot of time and effort into publishing something that they are sure hardly anyone will ever see is capable of. Given that I have been somewhat Edmund Fitzgerald obsessed since I first read about it, I was delighted to stumble across this one evening. Let's have a chat about resonant lattices. Okay, this sounds like some 9/11 conspiracy shit. When I first read about this, I thought that it was for the work of my old nemesis, Dave Hatcher Childress. Okay, for those of you who don't remember, including me, Dave, here's the guy who, among other things, thinks Stonehenge is a charging pad for the spaceships of visiting aliens. Oh, so he's completely off his rocker. Right. Whether or not it is his work is not clear, but I'm guessing not, if only because he would have put his name all over it. Anyway, a resonant lattice, according to people who know about these things, is a strange and very definitely not made up phenomenon that can occur in the Great Lakes. Get the feeling there's some sarcasm there, Dave.
No.
As far as just exactly what they are, opinions appear to be divided, at least when it comes to their origin. Before the physics nerds come for me in the comment section, I'm fully aware that a resonant lattice is a real thing. Google describes them as a periodic array of nanoparticles or other nanostructures that exhibit surface lattice resonances, or SLRs for lattice resonances, which are collective light-matter interaction phenomenon occurring when the array spacing supports a standing wave of light. Oh my god, what? For those of you who didn't pay attention in physics class, don't worry about it. I mean, I feel like I did pay. Physics was like a science I enjoyed. But this is just fucking gobbledygook to me. All we need to ascertain here is that these, and the things that appear in this theory, are different things. We are told that this type of lattice is something between an acoustic deflector, a focusing cone, and an amplifier. Basically, whenever one is in range of any given sound source, in this case the exceptionally loud engines of the Edmund Fitzgerald, that sound is reflected, concentrated, and enhanced into a tight beam. Once this beam hit the hull of the ship, it increased the vibrations caused by the engine to such a degree that the whole thing literally shook itself apart. Right. Sure, but wouldn't lots of ships then be shaking themselves apart all the time? There are two suggestions as to exactly why this happens in the Great Lakes and nowhere else, and I'm afraid that it really is a matter of the usual suspects. Although the source article mentioned both, the writer certainly had a favourite, and that was, of course, abandoned ancient alien technology. Oh, right. Okay, we're going wild now. You see, when the Earth was constructed, by some sort of ultimate master race, they naturally had to bring a lot of construction equipment with them, in much the same way that one of the excavators used to dig out the Channel Tunnel was buried in a side passage because the diggers never thought it might need to go backward. I know it's much more complicated than that, but this is not the topic of the video. Our intergalactic builders left a bunch of dangerous equipment behind. The really dangerous stuff got huge pyramids built on top of it. No! But the lattice was either not deemed to be dangerous enough, or intergalactic builders are as stupid as normal builders and they just forgot about it. Either way, it is, allegedly, responsible for many of the shipwrecks on the bottom of the Great Lakes, not just the Edmund Fitzgerald. Oh no, this is just such obvious bullshit. Like, we've gone from maybe it's a little bit believable, to aliens. The other theory that the writer briefly alluded to is basically the same idea, but instead of aliens, it's the government, and instead of construction equipment, it's an advanced superweapon being tested. So, I hear you yelling through your screens, just exactly what kind of evidence does this theory have? Gonna bet not very much, Dave? Well, there's actually quite a lot of evidence. All right, let's go. It's just that none of it's really any good. We have a redacted company memo that references anomalous, it's a difficult word, anomalous acoustic returns, with a handwritten instruction, destroy after reading. A blurry photograph of a fractured steel plate supposedly recovered from the site, marked with unusual ridges, and even a corrosion lab report from Duluth that allegedly noted unexplained crystalline growths and magnetorestrictive anomalies. I have no idea if magnetorestrictive anomalies are even a thing, but they sound suitably technical. It sounds like the sort of thing, Mr. Data, what's that? That, Captain, is a magnetorestrictive anomaly. Like Star Trek technobabble. The final piece of evidence is actually intriguing, though, not because it makes me believe the theory, but because it's a fantastic demonstration of just how far people are prepared to go with this sort of thing. As any of you who followed me through Brain Blaze will know, I have tried my hand at many things over the years, but one thing I do know a lot about is sound. I spent 3 years studying audio production at a fairly prestigious college, and I know when something is actually old or when it has been digitally altered to make it sound old. This makes the alleged recording of a former deckhand claiming that he had experienced this phenomena whilst travelling on another ship a year previously quite intriguing. I don't believe for a single second that the voice in the lossless audio file is telling the truth, but I would be prepared to bet heavily that the original sound was recorded on a reel-to-reel tape deck using appropriate equipment from the era. All in all, I don't set any store by the theory itself, but I wanted to include it more to show just how much the idea of something nefarious being afoot has captured people's minds even so long after the accident. The next theory is probably just as likely as the last, but it actually does have some corroborating evidence, especially if you're a believer in superstition, and boat people really are. That's true, right? They'll be like, oh no, you don't want to do this, you don't because superstition is a thing in maritime stuff, but it doesn't really cause disasters because it's not real. To give you an idea of just how mental owning a boat can make you, when my stepdad met my mother, he was working as a fisherman on a trawler out of Brixham Harbour. The first weekend that we went to visit after they met, he was showing us around town, and naturally she wanted to know a little bit about where he worked. Newly in love and wanting to make his new girlfriend happy, he drove down to the harbour, where the ship was docked, and showed her around. This, as far as nautical superstition goes, is a big no-no. The rules clearly state that bringing a lady on board before a voyage will result in all manner of catastrophes.
Even a miniature one.
Oh no, that sounds so real. You might think that this is just one of those things people say but never actually enforce, but apparently nobody on board would speak to him for the entire duration of the next trip, whether or not they were angry at him for placing them in danger or simply jealous that he got laid the night before and they didn't. Doesn't matter. Dude, Dave, that's your mum. That's your mum, Dave. And they didn't. It's a matter I might delve into a little more if the story didn't involve my mother. Still, the launching of the Edmund Fitzgerald was very definitely anything but smooth sailing, and things happened that day that would have seasoned sailors jumping directly into the icy water rather than taking a chance on such a cursed vessel. For a start, back in the day it was considered exceptionally bad luck to name a boat after a man. The Edmund Fitzgerald, named after the president of Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company, could well have been doomed from the start. If that's not enough for you, and quite frankly it should not be, there was also the ship's unofficial nickname. Although many would simply refer to her as the Queen of the Lakes, other people, presumably those less acquainted with tragic maritime history, referred to her as the Titanic of the Lakes. Why? You can't name a ship the Titanic. It's not a good idea. Like, am I superstitious at all? No. Would I name my boat the fucking... Actually, I would kind of name my boat the Titanic just for the lols, but... Fuck it, if I get a boat, I'm calling it the Titanic. Just because it's me, I'll fucking sink it. I couldn't find anything written down that says it's bad luck to name a ship after another ship that is famous for sinking, but maybe that's just because it really should be self-evident. But it's not all just name-related coincidences. Some actual things happened on launch day that should have perhaps led people to know what would happen one random day 17 years later. Right. Traditionally, when one launches a ship, the bottle of the finest champagne is wasted when it's smashed on the side. Elizabeth Fitzgerald, the wife of the boat's namesake, was chosen to carry out this most important of duties, and it quickly became evident that she'd not grown up in the right pubs. Most people I know could pretty much guarantee the breakage of a bottle on a single swing, but apparently it took Elizabeth between 3 and 10 attempts, depending on which source you believe. I mean, yeah, but also because of all the pressure in champagne bottles, they're very thick. Like, you really got to give it a good whack to break it. A beer bottle, a champagne bottle, requires a proper thumping. Then things got worse, genuinely worse, and somebody died. After struggling to release the logs that were holding the ship in place, 35 minutes work with a sledgehammer apparently, the Fitzgerald slid down the ramp all off balance, striking and destroying a nearby pier and sending a massive bow wave right across the harbour, soaking many other eager spectators on the other side. One man got more than soaked, however. Apparently, he had a weak heart, and all the excitement of it caused him to drop dead of a heart attack. I didn't really believe any of this to be particularly significant during my initial research, but it turns out there are genuinely people out there who believe that this was an omen, and nobody should have ever sailed on the Fitzgerald at all. What are they going to do? Just, scrap it? They're like, oh no, that guy died. The champagne didn't break. Bad luck. Scrap that bitch. Depending on where you stand on such things, this could either be a complete answer to the problem, the ship was cursed and therefore sank 17 years later, or a semi-interesting footnote about her first day in the water. Definitely the latter, in my opinion. Personally, I don't take superstitions all that seriously, or at least I tell people that I don't, although I will genuinely scoff when I hear stuff like this. You wouldn't catch me walking under a ladder, deliberately breaking a mirror, or crossing somebody on the stairs. Wait, what? What's the last one? Crossing somebody on the stairs? What does that mean? You just going past someone on the stairs? Is that bad luck? I didn't even know that. So I guess it's up to all of you to make up your own minds. This, for today at least, brings the conspiracy theories to a close. As to what actually happened to the Edmund Fitzgerald, here are my thoughts for what they are worth. I think that there are bits from most of the theories that make sense. From all the evidence I've examined, including the testimony of Captain Cooper, I'm inclined to believe that the Fitzgerald really did sustain damage off the coast of Caribou Island. Sticking with Captain Cooper, I also think that Msorley would have definitely noticed. If we take the transcript of the radio messages as fact, we know that the Fitzgerald started taking on water quite soon after that, but I believe that the damage was not yet substantial enough for Msorley to call it in to request immediate assistance. Fully agree, Dave. We're on the same page so far. We know that he asked the Anderson to get closer and stay with them until they reached Whitefish Bay, so it's probably safe to assume that the idea of a ship going down was at least in his mind. Yeah, so he's like, okay, it's not a mayday. It's just like, but could you just stay closer just in case things get worse? I don't think they will, but they could. Stay by. Not worth calling it a mayday. Fair play. Nevertheless, if the damage at that point was minor, he may well have believed that they could still make it under their own steam. So they continued on. Now let's look at what we may or may not know about the state of the ship. If it is true that the hull was again damaged, then it is possible that when the two big waves that Captain Cooper mentioned in his report hit the Fitzgerald, they made the small amount of damage that they picked up off Caribou Island into much, much more damage. If the metal plates were already weakened due to a lack of maintenance, then the extra stress from those two waves could very easily have caused said plates to buckle inwards, creating a much larger hole, and given that the ship was already overloaded, half filled with water, and in extremely choppy conditions, it really wouldn't have taken long for her to succumb to the waves. Yeah, this is what I think. Dave and I are on exactly the same page. I think this started off as something that he thought was rather minor, and very quickly and unexpectedly it became something very, very major. And the boat sank, and everyone died. Also, the resonant things with the acoustics definitely help shake it apart. Not really. Incidentally, I didn't claim to know anything at all about metal, welding, or shipbuilding in general, so I called a shipbuilder who I vaguely know and asked them, and they confirmed that my hypothesis was indeed valid. Thank you, Sadie. This would also explain why they never put out a distress call. They just did not have the time. 1 minute they were struggling, but as Msorley said, holding his own. The next, they were gone. Yep. Something that wasn't that bad that suddenly became a lot worse. It happens. I also have no reason to discount the testimony of the former cook who said that Msorley had turned into a miserable old bastard. A few people online said that he probably made it all up to get in the paper, but what he said just comes across as too mundane for that. It is entirely believable that an aging man in a difficult job with a wife whose health was failing could stop giving a fuck, and it's hardly stretching the boundaries of credulity to imagine that a big company would do everything they could in order to lessen their culpability in a legal case. I don't know what Simon and you all think of it, but I think we may have cracked it. I certainly don't believe that nuclear warheads, aliens, or top-secret government weapons testing was involved, and I've scoured both the clear net and the not-so-clear for any scrap of evidence to suggest that there were. This is a shame, because after all this time, I kind of wanted there to be something more. Still, at least I now know. Thanks again to all of you for staying until the end, and thanks to Simon for the opportunity to revisit this topic. If there's any of you out there who remember my first attempt, I'd be very interested to hear your comparisons in the comments. I don't even remember where we published this video, Dave. One last thing before I go. I just want to say thanks to the owner of the Maritime Horrors YouTube channel, without whom a lot of the information contained within this script would have been very difficult to obtain. Congratulations, you now have the second most extensive video about the Edmund Fitzgerald on YouTube. To everybody else, I shall hopefully see you again soon. And that is the end of the episode. We cracked it! It wasn't complicated. Thanks for being here.